Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for this opportunity to share this incredible work with you all today. Thank you to the Lake Huron Committee for allowing me this time to present. My name is Mike Kraczynski. I work for the Fish and Wildlife Service out of the Alpena, Michigan office. I am the Aquatic Invasive Species Coordinator for the Lake Huron and the western half of Lake Erie. And today I will be talking about all of the great ongoing invasive species early detection work in Lake Huron and highlighting a few particular species of concern that some of you may already be familiar with. So the invasive species early detection program consists of two major components in the Lake Huron Basin. The first is the early detection and monitoring program, which is a comprehensive surveillance program where we thoroughly sample the entire nearshore fish community in Huron using a variety of gears to try and find anything new so that we can work with our state partners to respond rapidly and prevent anything new from establishing in the Great Lakes. The second component to the early detection program is invasive carp eDNA surveillance. And with this, we take water samples from various locations around the Great Lakes and then run those through the Fish and Wildlife Service genetics lab to determine if there is any silver carp or bighead carp DNA present in the water body. I like to caveat this program by saying just because there's DNA of a fish present in the water does not mean that there's a live or even a dead fish in the water. There are many sources of DNA from fecal matter, bait, runoff from streets like sewage, fish markets, boaters, birds moving from system to system. So interpretation of a positive eDNA result is critically important to understanding what it does tell us, and that is that the DNA is present and it simply may warrant further investigation. So it does not tell us that if there is a fish present. What it tells us is if the DNA is present, you might want to go investigate with some other gear to try and obtain a fish in hand, which can be very useful on a large geographic landscape. So first, I'll run through the early detection and monitoring program or portion of the program, including some new information on the invasive Eurasian ruff in the St. Mary's River. Before I jump into Lake Huron specific work, I do like to show this map to highlight the broad swath of spatial coverage across the Great Lakes Basin. Since the inception of this program in 2013, which is funded by the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, the Fish and Wildlife Service has sampled over 25,000 sites on all 5 of the Great Lakes and handled more than 2.5 million individual fish. There's a tremendous amount of work that goes on in the background to plan and prepare this amount of effort, in addition to all the work that goes on in the water. As you can see, since 2013, there is good coverage here all the way down the Michigan coast of Lake Huron, from the St. Mary's River down to the Huron-Erie corridor. Last year, we surveyed 8 locations in Huron and about 300 sites. One of the key areas we sample is the St. Mary's River, and so I want to give a huge shout out to all of the St. Mary's River partners, including Bay Mills Indian Community, Department of Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Michigan DNR, Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, and Sault Ste. Marie Tribe of Chippewa Indians. Collectively, we sampled 132 sites in the St. Mary's River this last year, which is the most we've ever sampled there in a given year. We truly could not adequately cover this large geographic area without all of the great partnerships that we have up in the St. Mary's River. And we really look forward to continuing those partnerships this year and into the future, as that is certainly a priority for the Fish and Wildlife Service. Across Lake Huron, we captured 80 species of fish, which we estimate to be approximately 75% of all of the fish species present in Lake Huron. And of the nearly 94,000 fish we handled and 80 species across the 8 locations, we are happy to report that we did not identify any new invasive species to Lake Huron. However, we did have an increase in the number of Eurasian ruff captures in the St. Mary's River. Before I jump into the Eurasian ruff invasion expansion in the St. Mary's River, though, I want to take some time and just provide some general information on Eurasian ruff, as some folks here might not be as familiar with the species. This is a small perchid species, often compared to yellow perch. They begin spawning as early as 2 to 3 years old and can live nearly a decade. And as with many other successful invasive species, the Eurasian ruff is an opportunistic predator, eating a variety of foods from fish eggs to larval fish to benthic invertebrates and many other foods that are important to our young native fish in the lake. They're fairly robust fish and can tolerate a large range of environmental conditions, including they do pretty well overwintering under the ice. So Eurasian ruff initially invaded the Duluth area of Lake Superior back in 1986 and has since established themselves as part of the fish community throughout Superior. This species is restricted to Superior other than a couple of isolated populations in Lake Huron and Lake Michigan. So there is a population in Lake Michigan near the Escanaba area of the Upper Peninsula. This population was first recorded in 2002 and is currently monitored by the Fish and Wildlife Service and Michigan DNR. Though other detections of ruff have occurred in Green Bay, they have failed to establish. The other population of ruff found outside of Superior was found in Alpena or Thunder Bay, Michigan, back in 1995. However, this isolated population in Huron was effectively extirpated or removed by 2002 due to a combination of removal efforts and negative interactions with other species. There have been 2 other isolated detections of ruff in northern Lake Huron since, but as with the rogue detections in Lake Michigan, they have not established. So the most recent significant movement of Eurasian ruff in Lake Huron has come in the St. Mary's River. So looking at the movement of ruff the last few years, we can see that in 2022, the St. Mary's River Fisheries Task Group caught several ruff above the compensating gates in Lake Superior waters of the St. Mary's River, and a single ruff below the compensating gates in the Canadian waters of Lake George. As you can see by all of the other blue dots, there was a lot of other effort in the St. Mary's River that did not turn up any ruff. So in 22, we were pretty confident that ruff had not moved past Lake George. That was followed up by additional captures in 2023. As you can see by the map, the number of ruff in Lake George did increase from 1 to 11, and OM&R encountered a ruff at the southern end of Lake George near East Nevish Island. And last year in 2024, the number of ruff in Lake George increased yet again from 11 captures up to 50. Fish and Wildlife Service also captured a young ruff near the southern end of the St. Mary's River and Potaganissing Bay, and OM&R also reported 4 captures of young ruff in their broad-scale monitoring program in the St. Joseph Channel, where the St. Mary's River flows out into the North Channel. So we can see the pattern and the progression of the invasion front from year to year, with increasing captures in the northern reaches of the St. Mary's River, like in Lake George, and more frequent catches of ruff further and further south year after year. That said, we have yet to detect ruff in Lake Huron proper, but we do plan on stepping up surveys in this region this year and coordinating with our incredible partners in the North Channel to identify any ruff in Canadian waters. Of course, from the Fish and Wildlife Service perspective, any captures of ruff in U.S. waters of Lake Huron would be communicated to the Lake Huron Committee and the state of Michigan, as well as the St. Mary's River partners. As I mentioned, though, Fish and Wildlife Service is not able to conduct any surveys in Canadian waters this year, so we plan to work closely with our Canadian partners to communicate out any significant ruff findings in Canadian waters. I will make a plug here and certainly acknowledge that beyond the work here, there is a ton of work in fishing in Lake Huron that we are not engaged in. So I would ask that if anybody comes across ruff in Lake Huron, to reach out to the state of Michigan, the province of Ontario, or to me. If you have questions about the identity of a fish that might be a Eurasian ruff, but you aren't quite sure, or maybe you are concerned it's something you haven't seen before, maybe it's a new invasive species, you have concerns about that, we are happy and more than willing to assist and identify the fish and find those answers so that we can work truly collectively with our state, federal, and Canadian partners, as well as the public, to have the most up-to-date information on any potential invasion threats before they become an issue. In the past, we've received phone calls, Facebook messages, emails, you name it, about odd or concerning captures, and we've been able to follow up with those with some targeted sampling effort. So it's important for us or the state of Michigan to know so we can continue our partnership to collectively combat AIS in Lake Huron and throughout the Great Lakes. So again, if you have any questions or concerns about something that you may have caught, please take a photo of it, send it to me in an email, write down some of the characteristics of the fish, know how to contact me or your local DNR station. And again, please do not hesitate to reach out with anything you have concerns about. We're happy to help out and would rather err on the side of caution than not. So now that I've spent some time talking about the comprehensive early detection and monitoring program, I want to shift gears into our specific big head and silver carp eDNA surveillance work. Admittedly, most of this work occurs in southern Lake Michigan and western Lake Erie. However, we do annually sample Saginaw River for bighead and silver carp, as through our risk analyses, this is where they would most likely show up if they were to be present in the lake. If you're interested in learning more about the Fish and Wildlife Service Invasive Carp eDNA program, we do have a really great public dashboard that contains both some general information and all of the data we've collected over the last 12 years across the entire Midwest region, not just Lake Huron. I've included a QR code, so if you want to scan it with your phone, it'll quick link you to the site. It's interactive, which is nice, so you can filter out water body, state, year, etc. There's some really nice information here for those interested. And again, you can always reach out to me as well. In addition to the bighead and silver carp eDNA surveillance, we are also bringing online metabar coding. Now, some of you might be thinking, what the heck is metabar coding? Some of you may have heard this term, but not necessarily sure what it is. To put simply, I want to go back to step 1 of the invasive carp samples that we just talked about. When we sample for invasive carp, we take samples of water from different water bodies around Lake Huron. We then concentrate all of that DNA in the water down into these little pellets, and that's what gets sent off to the geneticists, who wave their magic wand and tell us if a specific species DNA is present or absent from the water sample. For the invasive carp program, we look specifically for bighead carp DNA and silver carp DNA. This process of DNA sampling is done through what we call qPCR or quantitative PCR, which is a term that you may have heard before. With metabar coding, we're able to look beyond 1 or 2 species and are able to look at all of the DNA in the water sample. As long as the geneticists have the genetic markers in the library, we're able to obtain DNA presence absence information on the entire fish community, which is fantastic when we're looking for a laundry list of potential invasive species. The last several years have been research and development of this tool, and though we are still in the process of developing it, we will be planning to soft launch this as a component to our program this year. As I mentioned previously in my presentation though, I do want to caveat this. This does not tell us if a species is present or absent. What it tells us is if the DNA is present or absent in the water sample. It's very important that we make that distinction, as misinterpretation of that can lead to the spread of misinformation. This is simply a tool on our tool belt, similar to gill nets, trap nets, minnow traps, electrofishing, other gears that we utilize. We'll be able to use this DNA information to help inform sampling and try to obtain fish in hand. Fish in hand is really the only confident result we have for ascertaining any invasive threat of a particular species. But again, the application of this across such a large geographic landscape can really help inform where we can allocate some of those limited resources to try and obtain those fish in hand. So that's all I have. Thank you again, everyone, for this opportunity to share the Fish and Wildlife Service AIS program Lake Huron surveillance updates. I apologize I'm not there in person to take questions, but please reach out to me. My email is here on the screen with any and all questions you have, and don't forget to reach out with any of the fish or catch concerns that you have. We really welcome fish photos that we can ID. It's truly a collective effort between the government and the public to protect the Great Lakes from invasive species. So we truly count on all of the eyes and ears that are out on the system, not just our crews. Thank you again, everybody.